Hello, this is Hamlet Dobbins, and this is Memphis Material, an oral history project chronicling the stories of the visual arts in Memphis, Tennessee. Memphis Material is a podcast celebrating the personal histories, the intimate stories, and the studio practices of some of the people who help shape the creative landscape of our city. These unedited interviews are all recorded at the Memphis Listening Lab, an archival gem located in the majestic Crosstown Concourse in beautiful Midtown. The website for Memphis Material was designed by the wonderful Brian Dixon. Now, we don't have sponsors for this project, but if we did, today's interview, the second of two interviews that we did with Andrea Morales, would be brought to you by photo books, like monographs for photographers. Photo books that are so big you have to sit down at a table to look through them. This interview was recorded on May 3rd, 2025. Enjoy the interview. All right, I'm going to push the button. And then, let's see, today is Saturday, May 3rd. It's 11 in the morning at Crosstown Concourse with Andrea Morales, part 2. Okay, yes. Here we go. So, did you, on the spot, did you get a chance to listen to any of it?
No, I didn't.
That's totally fine. I just wanted to check and see if there was anything where you were like, oh my gosh, I said it was Tony, but it was actually Billy, or whatever. I just wanted to make sure that everything was cool that way. And if I remember right, I listened to it this morning, and so we got up to the part where you had your internship at New York Times, and then we sort of paused there. Talk to me a little bit about what happened after that, because I would imagine that's a huge thing. You know, you've got this internship with this sort of prestigious institution, not just prestigious in terms of its news, but also in terms of its photojournalism. Talk to us a little bit about what happened after that.
Yeah, so I spent the summer at the New York Times, and while I was there, managed to get the offer from another newspaper to start my first job. So I had gotten on staff at the Concord Monitor in Concord, New Hampshire. And so I spent a lot of that summer just really living it up in New York. Because I was like, oh, I got a job. And at the time, my first, the salary when I started was $27,000. And that was in 2011. Which at the time had been the most I'd ever earned on my own. So I was just like, I can remember calling my mom and being like, guess how much it pays. And she was just like, okay, like very unimpressed because like I think her pay was probably about similar. And so she's like, okay, girl.
Now, when you say you were living it up in New York, to me, that would mean like going to the park a lot and taking lots of naps.
Yes.
But what does it mean to you?
Absolutely, exactly.
Okay, because everybody's idea of living
That's
up in
right.
New York is radically different. Talk to us a little bit about that.
I mean, New York is everything that like feeds the dreams about New York. It really is this place that is you can zip from one train stop to the next and just be in wildly different cultural experiences, and everything, because of the density of the situation, is everything so externalized that it really becomes like, for I think us sensory seekers, like a place of like very rich, like just I don't know, novelty. And for like if you're visiting, randomly seeing like SNL cast members on the street. Like I grew up on SNL, so I saw Rachel Dratch one time, and I was just like, it was so exciting. This like guy who was a bit actor on 30 Rock, I saw him once, and I remember that like it happened yesterday.
Now, when you were talking about being in New York, obviously New York is also a very large place, a very diverse place. What areas did you find yourself in the most?
So I had the total fortune of like having some housing arranged through the time. So I lived in a New York NYU dorm for the summer while the students were away in the East Village, which was like very cool, right next to what's that street called with all the wild St. Mark's? Yeah. So I had a really great time sort of, and it's so central to in terms of like the train system and everything. So I spent a few months there, and then for the last month, I had to get a sublet from a friend in Bushwick, which in 2011 would be like unrecognizable compared to today. But at the time, you could see like the beginnings of the changes, right? Like when I was subleasing this bedroom in this apartment, definitely was experiencing closer contact with giant rats, you know, than I was in the dorms at the East Village. Although there was many nights like walking home late from work, you know, walking from my train stop back to the dorm, and you just walk by a garbage pile that's like waiting to get picked up, and it'll be like they hear you coming, and all the rats just shoot out. And yeah, so there was lots of rat encounters. I'm going off script here,
I'm,
but
I'm
or
totally
no.
I'm totally okay with that. No, I'm curious though. So you were there in New York. I would imagine, obviously, the job part is very particular and sort of exciting. But I would also imagine being in that environment for yourself, not connected with your job, would also be really exciting in terms of taking photographs and taking images. What
Hmm.
kinds of things was that the way it was for you?
It was. Because I was basically treated as a staff member, as the local photo staff in New York by the Times. I had assignments, almost every day of my 3.5 months there. So, and like, I think I was so overwhelmed by just how much there was everywhere that I never ended up digging into a project like I have in like other like employment opportunities, like internship or job or otherwise. Like my time here in Memphis, is a good example of like the work really blossoms once I've gotten rooted into a place, and because it was so easy to just move without roots, honestly, in New York, like, and just like observe and bear witness to all these like, I loved going to Flushing. I loved going to Queens. I went to Staten Island a couple of times. That's crazy. Like all of these things where I did like a roller hockey league thing with this guy on Staten Island. He was like part of this roller hockey league. It was very fun. Just a bunch of Staten Island bros on rollerblades, and would do like food assignments and Flushing. Um, yeah, I had this the thing that I got kind of like really where I really built, I guess, my sense of home was this feature that they had at the time called Neighborhood Joint. I don't know if I talked about this previously. Okay. But Neighborhood Joint was like a recurring feature that was visually driven, and it was about just like a place where people hung out, which like places in New York, hangouts are like very storied. So, like there was like a deli where this group of like old timers would get together and play music, like old timey music. I can't even remember the style, but there was an accordion involved. So I was there. It was very cool. And like a place in Washington Heights that had like all these like bespoke guys hanging out. I went to like Red Rooster before I got very, very, very Marcus Samuelson big. Like it was just trying to find bits of community and trying to treat these things like I had treated my assignments in Lima, Ohio, because like that's what I know, and I think that's what I can sort of connect with best. And so I got lucky that that feature existed, because like otherwise I was like, as you can see, like ADHD is like part of my process. Like, so yeah.
Well, I mean, that thing that you're talking about in terms of like part of your process. I mean, to me, the thing that I've been struck with, is how with your job or your position or your place, is that there is this movement. And then there's also, like, as you go from place to place, it seems like there's a kind of investigation that also takes place in there in terms of you finding a place or you not finding a place, or for you to sort of recognize these things that are interesting to you, obviously going back way, way back. And to me, I mean, one of the things that's really interesting about going to New York is that it really is everything. And so, like, for example, when I go to New York, I always find myself, if there's a way for me to be on the High Line, that's where I'm going to be, because I just love the plant nerds, and
Yeah.
it is some varsity level plant nerdage. And then I also love that we're not dictated by walk signs, and then I also really love that sort of alternative view of the city, a particularly packed part of the city.
Yes.
And so like I kind of like that, and then I also sort of like the conveyor belt spectacled nature of it, where I can stop for a second and then just watch 1,000 people walk by, without really worrying about it. And so I'm curious, what were some things that you found as a place that would be kind of like a rest or a respite in all of that chaos? Or is that something that you don't necessarily look for?
It might be like because I'm a child of Anthony Bourdain, like just a table for one somewhere. I have always like loved eating by myself. I've done it a lot on assignment, but like doing it on assignment in New York became like a whole other semi-adventure, especially from the dorms or, that 4-bedroom that I was subletting in Bushwick. So the table for one where you're just sitting and kind of getting that people watching, like, yeah, I agree with you with the High Line on all fronts. It is such a beautiful place to just like observe all kinds of things. And I think a table at like wherever there is, because, tables also get creative in New York. There's like, they're kind of tucked into weird corners or like, or sometimes you're in one of those like family style tables. And so even then, people know how to make those family style tables like a table for one. So like that has all, I don't know, that's like a part of like physically, I think, belonging in a place that you're interested in and just like taking it in. It definitely informs, I think, the way I, like photograph. I think, in a kind of, you want to sit down and take it in before you start, moving through it.
And I can imagine too, I mean, one of the things that you've talked a bunch about is sort of being aware of the being on assignment, and like you sort of as being a kind of other in a space that is often really radically different from where you grew up. And then I would imagine New York would just be this thing where that kind of parameter or that kind of restriction is removed, where it's just like we're all weirdos and we are all from every possible place in the world and we're all kind of aliens. And so it's like aliens inside an alien inside inside of a foreign, like one of those Russian nesting dolls.
Yeah.
Was that kind of how it was for you?
Yes. So okay. So I think that like in listening to you just think through that, I feel like a lot of things are connected in the sense that I'm really attracted to what our interiority externalized, and so that happens in youth, which is why I think I spent all that time in Ohio with the youth in Jameska. I think that definitely happens in New York to the point that you're sort of describing, like because of how close everyone is and just because of how bombastic the city has been for so long, people are just like who they are, unapologetically. And Memphis has the same thing, like to me, one of the sort of like creepier places to end up is like a kind of suburban place where things are so samified that they lose the interiority, like actually hides a lot of what I think can be scary things, like in the suburbs, like the sameness of it all is not comforting to me. I think there's something really cool about living loudly, and I think that youth do it just by nature. New York does it by both like design, tradition, and like creativity that perpetuates there. And Memphis, I think, has no choice but to do that because it's a hard place to be. And if you're not going to fight for who you are and who your people are, then you're not going to make it here. And so the people who remain here are like very loud about who they are. And I love that.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, another thing that I'm thinking about, in terms of you being there in New York for that extended period of time, anytime you're in some place for, more than a couple of weeks, you start to kind of see the things. I'm curious what kinds of other photography or other kinds of photojournalism or approaches do you feel like you were exposed to in your time there in New York?
Yes. Okay. So I was in New York and I had a couple of my friends from grad school. Victor Blue, who's an incredible photojournalist. He does a lot of combat stuff, but he's just, yeah, very sensitive, uh, talented photographer. And my other homie, Brian Thomas, who's also just such an artist. They are both like photo book nerds, and they like me. They taught me in a lot of ways how to like love on photo and how to nerd out your love on photo. And so yeah, we would spend a lot of like every time I go back to New York, we still do the same thing. We'll go get some like food somewhere in like Midtown Manhattan, or near Union Station, and then hit up Dashwood, hit up Strand.
Okay, yep, yep.
And there's definitely been like there's probably many other spaces now where you can get with independent bookstores, you can get like the amazing stuff that like flows through New York. But those were the main ones because they're only a couple blocks away from each other. But there's just such a range, that's, I mean, I feel like that's where I learned about Tommy Ka, because I think he had something maybe at Dashwood at the time, some kind of, I don't know. But yeah, so it was just yeah, that was like a way to like really like Victor, whose taste is like very different from mine, would pull out stuff and we'd like share about like what we liked about these photo books. And so like New York in this very interesting way does serve, I mean, and you could do that without spending money. Of course, I would impulsively buy at least like $80 to $120 worth of photo books. You can see my in my guest room. It's all in a bookshelf. I have so many photo books. I do love a photo book. I love an object. I think especially growing up in a time when I did a lot of my learning through digital photography, did a lot of my producing through digital like platforms. The New York helped me connect. My time in New York helped me connect with object, like photography as an object. Photography is something outside of photojournalism that could be like lasting in many different ways. There was just such an exposure to like the levels of resonance and power to and just the museums obviously were like always great. I'm confusing things that I saw maybe when on return trips to when I was actually there in New York, but like because of my time in New York, the return trips do have this like pattern now where I have like go see what the ICP is doing, see what like the MoMA's got in terms of photography, like what sometimes they change out their, what are they called, the not the holdings, the stuff that they have in their collection.
Now, okay, you got my curiosity all piqued up. So let's talk about books. Talk to me about some books. What are some that stand out to you and why?
So there's just so many photo books I love.
P.S. This card holds like 100 hours of information, so we have all the time in the world. And so if we just sat here for the next hour and a half and talked about books, I'm totally happy.
That's fun. Thank you for that. But okay, I think that the book that I first saw and was like, okay, this is like, photo books can be this. I don't think it's my favorite by any means. By any means, but it definitely had an impact on me. But it's Jim Noctway's Inferno.
Okay.
I mean, it's just an incredibly brutal like object. So Jim Noctway is like a very storied photojournalist in terms of combat. He was he's really canonized because of like his style was always like 35 millimeter black and white and like very close that the closeness evokes some kind of danger or attention, that is, I think has imparted his like legacy with some bravery, because he's seen, witnessed, and photographed a lot of things. There's a movie called War Photographer about him. That's very interesting. He basically has like a GoPro on his camera for parts of it, so you're hearing his shutter click as you're also seeing like what he's photographing. It's interesting. And this was also, I mean, like, I feel like our exposure to war imagery between when I first saw Inferno and now is like, like Inferno doesn't hold a candle to like what you could like pull up onto your feed right now. But in terms of like, yeah, witnessing brutality, like it was like I think I talked about Sebastião Salgado last time. So he was like, to me, he was like a kind of like, they're both like these uncles in photojournalism. Like Sebastião Salgado was one that was like more empathetic with this in the struggle and viewing the struggle, and Jim Nachtwey is kind of brutal in seeing the struggle. He doesn't really see like he in doesn't see good or bad. He just sees conflict. So Inferno is like, I don't know how many pages it is, like super thick. Definitely more like an inch or two thick. And just page after page, full bleed of Jim Nachtwey's like 35 millimeter. And like it's a longer book so that they didn't have to crop for the 35 millimeter. So it's just like really heavy, really big, and you like flip through it like, you have to sit kind of at a coffee table, which is also like, like a photo book. A lot of the photo books I love now are ones that I can hold anywhere, but this one demands that you set it down on the table. So it's like asking you to sit with like the discomfort of the things that he has sort of bravely but impartially witnessed, and the judgments rise up in you. I mean, again, this is not my favorite book, but it was like in the sense of like the book is doing this, like what a book does, and what me clicking through a gallery full of Jim Nachtwey's photos can't do. Like that's I think that was the first time it like really clicked for me what an object is possible. But since then, I mean, I love Carolyn Drake. She's an incredible photojournalist who I think maybe I mentioned her last time because she has moved into like conceptual. She's been mixing her documentary, which she's an incredible documentary photographer. I've looked up to her for a long time, but she has really, I see her pushing her style in the direction of more art book. And I love it because it's still kind of like you still see her as a photographer, her voice, you see her sensibility, but like the book I think has like helped her develop a style that like doesn't require, it's kind of like that can tell a story in a more contained way. I love a book like that. There's a photographer, Alessandra Sanguinetti, who is I think she's Argentine. I might have also talked about her last time because maybe you asked me like people I looked up to. These are two of them. Alessandra Sanguinetti has like these 2 volumes of projects about young women in like the sort of like southern rural parts of Argentina. And both of those volumes are like these self-contained universes for people who maybe don't get given that like agency, in their regular life. So it becomes like this object of like reverence for the people who are participating in making the book with you, because she like basically like puts like this like very beautiful spotlight on this world that these 2 girls have created, and she does that at one period in their life in this first volume, and then like maybe 15 years later in the second volume. And the 2 books look very similar. They're big square books. The images almost feel biblical. And like that also, me holding a Bible now, you'll see maybe some like burning on my skin. But, I remember holding Bibles a lot as a kid. And so like, especially in this like, digitizing of our lives, it is a little bit more rare that I am holding a book. And so when I'm holding an Alessandra Sanguinetti book or a Carolyn Drake book, I feel very much like they've done a good job at being like, just like, we know that the world exists outside, but just look at this right now. And that kind of invitation from an artist, I think, is very cool.
Yeah, me too. Now, I mean, when you were talking about when you would go and you would get this book, I'm curious too. I mean, as a avid book haver and a book looker througher, I mean, to me, there's a kind of solace that happens in them, but then there's also a kind of like a time, a familiarity that builds up over time when you have these images. But then also sometimes it will satisfy like a vitamin deficiency in you. You know what I mean? Like when you go to the fridge and you're like, I gotta have broccoli today, or I'm going to die. And so like when you go to the shelf, are there artists, photographers who have helped you sort of work through some ideas, and if so, how and who?
I mean, yeah, the goat is probably Latoya Ruby Frazier. She really occupies such a singular, but like a space that she's, I think, intentionally working to make bigger. Um, that also kind of treads the line, or like the difference between art and like participatory documentary. Um, so she's her. I mean, she came and spoke in Memphis once.
Did you go?
I did.
When she said, normally my talks are 3 hours, and then she said, I'm gonna hold. They said I could only have one, but I'm gonna hold it down to two. Do you remember when she said that?
I was like crying through the whole thing.
Yeah. It was so good. Anyway, what do you remember about that talk? Talk to me about it.
Honestly, I think like I said, I was very emotional because at that point I had seen her speak once at another photo thing when she was still very like coming up, and I had the portrait of the family book that she made already, or family album book that she had already made, and so I was like sitting in my lap at the old MCA auditorium where she spoke, and I think she was going through. I mean, I just remember her being like a lot more like her presence was like much more contained than I thought it was going to be, because like that family album book is very tender, very vulnerable, very vulnerable. And she took that vulnerability and has used that vulnerability to like open her career into these kind of like bigger like projects, particularly around labor. I really sad I missed that MoMA retrospective of hers last summer. Very sad. Apparently it was amazing. But it's all focusing on labor, I think, and solidarity. But so she put out a piece of work that was very vulnerable, extremely like genre shifting, and then has kind of like turned into this like blazered, I'm not saying that negatively, but she like I remember her being like very like like standing on her authority, which she should, and she was talking about, I think, had started some of that work that she did with the UAW folks in like both Flint and some of that stuff up in like the Rust Belt, the continued work in the Rust Belt. And so I was just like, this book that had made me feel like it was okay to explore my own identity with myself. And I was seeing her move into like this more serious thing. It's like, well, shit, it's time to get serious though. So I was like a mess the whole time though, crying, and like went and just like was like, okay, like calm down. Was gonna get my book signed and just fell apart. And I remember her being like understandably not uncomfortable, like she wasn't shading me, but she wasn't just like, oh honey, which is like what I would do.
Right.
But I was just like broke down. I was like, thank you so much. And she was like, you're welcome. And like, I mean, it was wonderful. I don't know. She owed me nothing. She gave me plenty. Like, that talk was wonderful. She really showed me how she had grown from like the previous talk I'd seen her at, to both as like a person like doing the work, but also a person in the industry, which I think is really valuable. She talked about her mentors, and at the time I remember feeling like I didn't really have mentors. I had gone through like a mentor gap a bit, particularly at the times, just because I was just overwhelmed. And my grad school experience was also like, I didn't really find a So when she was talking about her mentors, it made me think about like not just how I can think about the ones that I have had that have like what they've done to serve me, what they've done to teach me how I could be myself in this job. But also thinking about just like the deeper importance of like community within photographers and editors.
Now, I'm curious. I mean, you mentioned that thing about vulnerability with LaToya Ruby Frazier, and for me, vulnerability is such an important part of art making. It's such an important part of like an honesty and sort of making things. I'm curious, how do you, when you're talking about vulnerability in LaToya Ruby Frazier, how do you see that manifested? Like, say, for example, if I were a person that didn't understand how vulnerability would be shown in photographs, how would you explain it?
Yeah, there's probably levels to it. I think the first and most like easiest to perceive like level is that the images themselves are of portraits of people in like vulnerable states. You know, I mean, like not because like not even an interiority, right? Like just because they're physically like in a house coat. You know, it's a lot. There's not any kind of if I can remember right, I don't think that there's any photographs where they're like totally dressed up for the photo. Maybe there's like photos where people are wearing other things other than like comfy house clothes, but mostly it is like it's a book that takes place like in a living room in a town, and the main characters are in that living room, you know? And so, but like the main character is that she's helping us see and understand is like her. So putting your own body in front of the camera is, you know, like I think is a very vulnerable making thing, particularly like I think when she did it, you know, like I think obviously there's lineage between her and Carrie Mae Weems and how they used their body as like its own kind of like disruptive element in their photography. Of course, it goes much deeper than that, you know, because there's just like I think that like a second sort of level of the vulnerability is like the surrender to narrative that those photos kind of also like do, you know, like there's a lot of things that those photos could invite one to project, right? Depending on who we are, where we grew up, whatever, all the things that make up our biases. So again, like not only is it your like you and your body and like your house shoes, you know, but it's also and like your hair not totally styled, you know. It's not only that, but it's also like, you know, shown in a way that, yeah, it like the people who get it are gonna get it and find home in it. Some other people are, you know, and that I think that can be really scary to put your like yourself, your kind of, yeah, as a narrative canvas rather than like a necessarily like a didactic, you know, vision.
Yeah, and I had not heard that, or maybe if I had not, like, it had not locked itself in place, that participatory documentary practice. I mean, that makes sense, but I don't think I've ever heard that particular expression. Now, I'm curious, too, speaking of LaToya Ruby Frazier, I can't remember if we talked about this last time after we turned everything off, but have you watched that Gregory Crutzen? So Gregory Crutzen at Yale, when everything went bananas with COVID, he started doing this like Zoom lecture series for his kids at Yale. And it's so interesting because I don't know if the people know that it's still on there. I mean, it really is. I mean, it's vulnerable in a way that we really didn't know if the world was going to end, you know? And basically, I think Crutzen just kind of called his friends and said, hey, you know, I've got these kids in an MFA program and we need to like do something. Is it okay if we record you talking? And so it's got like Kira Walker and Stephen Shore and LaToya Ruby Frazier.
Cool.
And all of the boundaries in all of those conversations are down. And so like Kira Walker is talking about video games that she's been playing. And, you know, like, you know, some people will sort of have a particular language that they sort of fall back on again and again. And for me, it's a kind of like I know that this says it in the way that I need to say it, and so I'm going to say this thing. And none of those conversations were like that. It was really interesting. But there's a conversation that she has with him in the class, and I think it was like the very first month of the pandemic. And so, you can tell that she's really frustrated because she's not out there taking the photographs and she's away from that work. But it was especially vulnerable and frank. It was really interesting. And I always assign it to my students to watch that and then the other presentation that's more kind of like the kind that she gave at MCA, where she sort of begins by talking about her instructors. Now, just out of curiosity, in terms of thinking about LaToya Ruby Frazier and how large she is in your landscape, what do you think? Are there things that for you where you've sort of been in a place where you've been like, oh, that feels like some of that language, and that feels really good in the way that we sometimes will honor our teachers or our aunts and uncles in the land of art?
If there's someone,
I mean, if like there's been a time for you, sorry, that was a really like rambling question.
No.
Okay, so here's what I'm thinking. What I'm curious about is, so we're thinking about LaToya Ruby Frazier as being this sort of like, not a role model, but kind of like someone that we really look up to, and that we really, we say that person is doing the thing.
Yes.
And so have there been times in your practice where you've been like, oh, that worked, in the way that, or that's a lesson that I learned from LaToya Ruby Frazier.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely, sir. I mean, and I haven't really thought about the content of that talk that she gave at MCA in a minute. So even as we're talking, I feel like the little pieces are kind of coming back up.
So good.
It was great.
Yeah.
It was great. And she, I think, was talking about her process, like with just getting into union halls and like convincing like very kind of closed off auto workers that she meant no harm, she'd do no harm, that kind of thing. I don't know why it empowered me more than some like previous, I think previously my sort of previously held like MO on things is like ask for forgiveness, not permission, which I think can be a very helpful thing when you're trying to be intrepid in the face of someone trying to hide something behind power, right? But in general, when we're moving through these spaces about the spaces that contain our story, the stories that we think are important to tell, we shouldn't feel entitled. And so I think that conversation, she gave me a lot of permission, especially since I had, when I saw that, I had just started being like a full-time freelancer. I was like, I think my second year of full-time freelancing. And so especially since then, since I was like in that position and feeling a little bit adrift after like leaving my staff job and not knowing how to photograph in a new community that I didn't have, like, I couldn't be like, oh, I work at the paper, Right. She helped, I think, lay a map for like, it's okay to be like nice to people and not like, the newspaper would always be like, you have to be arm's length with your sources. And generally that's like good advice, but it gets over applied in a way that makes us kind of like robotic weirdos sometimes. So recognizing that you can have your own practice in terms of like maintaining an ethic and rapport and care with the people who are at the center of the story you're trying to tell. Because even like during the Jameska stuff, I would always feel guilty that I was close with her, I would feel very guilty about that. And I kind of like would underplay it to my professors. But, and there's a lot of ways, this isn't like a and B issue, right? There's not like really a binary to, I think, the thing I'm describing, like what's right and what's wrong. There's perceptions around that. And we have to be careful, of course, right? Like, because even like, I had an experience here in Memphis where I got very hurt by people I was working on a story with and I was trying to be participatory with. And they lied to me in a real bad way and I got very hurt. It was very emotional. So like I think about her again when like she is like she knows through maybe through just instinct or experience when to open up and when to sort of stay true to your mission, but also like protect yourself.
Well, I mean, for me, I mean, that thing that you were talking about, how there's no binary between there. I mean, I think if there were a binary, it would make that job easy.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that kind of navigation is the thing that makes people good or bad at it, you know, and then also it's probably what really makes it rewarding for us as the makers. Okay, we could just hang out here and talk about LaToya B. Frazier for the rest of the day, because I love her. She's so good.
She is.
And
she
there's
is.
and there's also a really good Brooklyn Rail interview. I'll send it to you later.
Oh my gosh,
It's
yeah.
really good.
I feel like I just want to take your class.
I just want to hang out and talk about LaToya B. Frazier. Okay, so you were there in New Hampshire. You had this gig in Concord where you
Yes.
were on staff.
Yes.
Talk to me a little bit about that, because you were there for a significant amount of time, no?
Yeah, compared to now, I mean, like now I've been in Memphis. This will be my 11th year. So I was like, wait, that's crazy. So it feels so like little now, but yeah, I was there for almost 4 years. And I loved it so very much. I loved it so much up there. It was so beautiful. The people are kind of weird and sweet, and the New England accent is very charming to me. Yeah, just like it was just such a beautiful place. Mountains.
Yeah, the Green Mountain.
It's
No, the White Mountains.
yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. It is gorgeous up there. Now, is being outside, is being in the mountains, is that a thing that is a part of your life?
I think that New Hampshire definitely is like where I had my like outdoorsy glow up, because I was kind of open for everything, but like I was in Girl Scouts in Miami, so we went camping like in Miami, so it just and I hadn't really been like I'd been camping a few times with like some of my more crunchy friends, so I just kind of like would learn things along the way. But in New Hampshire is when I started like kind of getting more comfortable. I still have not skied. I don't think that I don't feel like that'll end well for anyone.
I'm just totally happy walking around.
I am too.
Yeah.
I would go to the lodge. I had a friend who who would like teach classes for free ski pass type thing, one of our coworkers. So sometimes we'd go up to the lodge and just drink beer and look at people walking around in their like funny ski boots. It was great.
No, but what was, I mean, in terms of thinking about the landscape, do you think, was that something that, I mean, I would imagine being in New Hampshire and then suddenly finding yourself in Memphis, or being in Miami and then finally yourself in New Hampshire, there's this like itch that is being scratched there that is not being scratched in Memphis. Is that something that you sort of feel like you miss?
Yeah, I definitely do. I think, I could drone on about it for a long time, but I'm trying, again, you got to fight for everything in Memphis. So yeah, you find ways, like I like my office, the Concord Monitor's office was right along the Merrimack River. And so right across, you could cross this like little shady bridge, quaint as hell, but like extremely architecturally touch and go. But you could cross that, and then you could just walk to this little river beach. And so sometimes I'd get just like pissed off at work and be like, I had my bathing suit in my car, and I could just like drive 3 minutes down the road and take like a mile walk into the woods and go swimming in the Merrimack.
Wow.
Yeah. It was amazing. I actually ran for like health, because I could run to the riverbank or to the river beach and then get in real quick and then run back, and I was like, this is comfortable for me.
Now, I'm curious what kind of like we were talking a little bit before about your sort of day-to-day life and sort of the unpredictability of it there in Lima, Ohio. And so now we're in Concord. Lima, sorry, Lima. So then how was it different, or was it just sort of like a different environment?
Yeah, it was kind of like a different environment. Yeah, it was I long for this job to exist forever into eternity, but the community news photographer was kind of like there was almost like a template to it, right? Like you'd work 5 days a week. You'd either work morning shift or night shift. If you had night shift, you were mostly photographing sports. So we would rotate the night shift like every other season, I think. Um, and if you were in the day, you were mostly doing news and features. But the Concord Monitor had actually won a Pulitzer Prize couple years before I was there. So the newspaper had, even though it was like a very small family owned community newspaper, it had a reputation in the photojournalism community because the editor who had been there previously was had been there to help Preston Ganaway win her Pulitzer Prize. Was known as like a mentor, and like it was like a place where young photojournalists could get into projects and go deep. I was hired by someone else. He's fine. But that spirit was kind of lingering, and the newsroom also had an existing kind of like more collaborative experience with photo than I'd experienced in other places. Because like photo had earned the paper a Pulitzer Prize. Usually like photo gets treated like a service department.
Now, talk to me a little bit about that Pulitzer Prize, because I would imagine when something like that is happening there, it's something that's in your brain. Talk to me, what was their project? What was it that got them the prize?
So Preston Ganaway was the photographer that had photographed this family going through loss while the mother was experiencing terminal cancer. So she just did this like beautiful, beautiful essay of like a family in their everyday that had all these moments that kind of communicated, the both like the bittersweet and the struggle to be present, all these things. And so it was just like a good ass like photo essay about a family going through something. But because she had photographed it in such a sensitive way that like cued all these emotions that helped us connect with like every member of that family, it had stood out as like a Pulitzer. What's it called? It won that Pulitzer for that work. I think it was for the feature photography.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. And so you were there for a significant amount of time. Talk to me about that environment, because I would imagine that being there for so long, you were really sort of able to find connections and find a kind of resonance in that place. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I found I lived in like a very old house. I think it was like almost like 150 years old. I lived in the top floor, and I had the owners lived on the bottom. Fred, my landlord, I loved Fred. He had kids. He was fun, and then KJ was my other neighbor. This like single mom and her two like giant sons. They were grown men, but they lived with her. And so I loved my little. I was like on top. It was on like the third floor. It was like a finished attic, basically. I loved my little apartment. It was just me and my cat, and I could like watch like kids walking to school every day. There was like one guy who I was obsessed with who had a very rotund corgi and would like give this corgi treats every time it did anything. And so they would just like walk down the street and be like, treat time, treat time, treat time. It was so there's a lady who pushed a cat in a stroller. Like it was a small town, and I really just like lived it up as a small town resident. So, like one of the things that I would say when I was here in Memphis and sort of like grieving, to people like what am I missing about having moved from New Hampshire, was like going to the farmer's market, and like I was down with the garlic guy, like, what's up? Like you just like walk, because you photographed all of them for one reason or another at this point, right? Like, yeah, it was so fun. Oh, New Hampshire also had this tradition of what's it called? Town hall season. Because they love their like, old school democracy vibes there. So it's like hyper democratic. It's like all these towns basically have town hall meetings where they vote on the issues for their towns, like in person. Like they raise their hands and it's a count, and that's how they pass things. we covered a lot of town halls. That's why we had a town hall season. It was like all of March. And so you'd see the same things over and over again. Like you'd see kind of people figuring out what matters to them and what doesn't that particular window. You'd see what they put out at the bake sale table. Yeah. All of those things became like, yeah, just recurring, comforting things that like when I returned to them, I felt like I could see something new about it now that I've seen it once, you know. And as an artist, as a photographer, being able to do that, being able to return to people and build up with them, you know, is great.
It feels like, I mean, a lot of the things that you've talked about so far in terms of thinking about the things that you're interested in and that you're sort of being drawn towards, it isn't necessarily like conflict with a huge C. And it also sounds like time there in New Hampshire was sort of idyllic.
A little bit.
Was there a kind of struggle that was there that was holding you, or was it really just sort of this time without struggle?
No, there was definitely struggle. I mean, the newsroom went through a massive amount of change in my brief time there. Like, our photo editor had gotten laid off at one point, so it was just me and my coworker John Tully, and we had an intern, and we were managing the intern and doing all the photo budget stuff, and showing up at editorial meetings. Like we were basically sharing the job of photo editor for like a year, and then he got laid off, and then it was just me and an intern, and I was like, okay, like I'm gonna hold. Like we finished with an intern. All of our interns were amazing. They were all like basically coworkers that just got paid less. It's all silly, but then we held off on getting another intern, and they brought in an editor who had been there previously, and him and I just did not vibe. Like it just, yeah, there was a lot of things that. And so that's, I mean, in addition to also only getting paid, I think I got up to 29,000 by the time I left. In addition to like the poor pay, I was like, I am not going to deal with this man. You know, like I just, yeah, and at that point, my partner, who I'd been with for I think like 5 years, had gotten his job here in Memphis, and so I was like sad to go, but like that was the conflict. Like there was like the thing that kept me there kind of safely was the job, and like all of the rewards that came with it, like being a part of this community that was really cool, working with people I really loved, getting to experiment with different kinds of ways of visual storytelling. But then, yeah, that all felt like it went away really quickly. Yeah.
So I'm trying to come up with some other kind of this is to that as this is to that, like a move from Concord, New Hampshire to Memphis, Tennessee. I can imagine something that would be a little bit more different, but not many. And so that's a massive shift. And so what, in terms of like you said your partner was here,
yeah,
and that you moved down here. I can only imagine what that was like. And so you were also saying that you came down really without a job.
Yeah.
Okay. Talk to me a little bit about that. That must have been terrifying.
Yeah. Well, you know, my previously described firm grasp on what money actually is definitely helped me make that decision. I mean, I had like, I don't know, I had like maybe like a couple thousand in savings, like 5, maybe 4, I don't know. So I thought I was coming down here, and I was like, I ain't gonna work for like a year. Because like I had just come out of grad school where I was like, you know, spending very little money. So, but yeah, so it was a big change, but I really wanted to be with my partner, and had come to visit him in Memphis like the week after, basically like the week around New Year's 2013.
Okay.
2013 going into 2014. Sorry, I had a little burp. So I had come to visit, and I think one part of the previous question I didn't answer was like also just being very otherized in New Hampshire. And, there was like a guy who was like a regular at one of the bars who asked me like, so what are you? The what are you? And I said, I'm Peruvian. And he's like, where's Peruvia? My guy. Like, I don't know. There's something a little bit disarming about that level of ignorance, but at the same time, like, you want to grow with people, in your community. And things I remember, like, even some of the people I had been hanging out with, like, kind of like around, there was like, I got into like a really big fight with someone I thought was a friend about Steve McQueen, who directed 12 Years a Slave. Yeah. And like, I think he was the first director. Was he the first black director to get that Academy Award?
Don't know.
I think so. There was some reason that we were talking about he had done a first something in terms of like the Academy, and like the Oscars had just happened or something, and we got into like this huge fight because he was like basically gaslighting me around like just like affirmative action type stuff, like, and it just wasn't cool. You know what I mean? Like at the time I had a lot more patience, a lot more youth, and I can't believe I spent time trying to like clarify something for someone. Not that I was right, but at least like acknowledge like what the fuck, what you're saying is wrong. So there was that, and like when I came to Memphis, obviously I was like, I am not gonna have to deal with almost any of that. Any of that. People still say crazy things no matter where you are, but yeah, I just knew that like coming to a majority like black city, was gonna be, it was already gonna give me something that I was really needing. And so I had to leave the clear creeks behind.
Now, you were saying that you came in at that particular time. I'm always interested as somebody who sort of has always been here. I'm always curious, what were some things that really sort of stood out to you? Maybe not necessarily just like visual things. It could have been anything. What were some things that really sort of struck you initially about the city?
Yeah, I think that visually, it definitely already, like, I was like, this place looks very different. I had driven through Memphis previously while I was in Ohio. A friend of mine's sister was like TFAing down in Cleveland, Mississippi. And so we drove down to see her. And so I'd driven through Memphis, and I was like, the roads are pink. Like the storefronts look from like another time, that in the quick drive through, you're just like, wow, this place is distinct, and like I had the closest to like the South that I had really experienced previously was Gainesville, Florida. And Gainesville, Florida and Memphis are very different. So I was like, okay, this is like the South. And then when I came back for that visit around New Year's, I really got to experience people like for the first time. We went down to Beale Street for New Year's and went to, what's it called? Oh, that pool salon down there. It's like Friends or Slappy. I don't know what it's called. But there's a pool salon that's been down there forever. Okay. So we played pool, and then we watched the hard rock guitar drop, and people were just like chatting, like that thing that we were talking about earlier about Memphis being also kind of like an externalized place. Like people, like I was chatting with, in New Hampshire, they keep their vests tight. Memphis, like I'm like knowing about the cashier at the grocery store just on my way out. Just trying to pick up some tampons, sister. But thank you so much. Like now I know about what you're going through today, and like that, like actually was something I liked, that I loved. Like being able to acknowledge people without necessarily without necessarily being some kind of transactional thing. I think there was like a very clear sense that people, like, just by nature tend to connect if they're sharing something here in Memphis. And whether that be space, like a moment, like having witnessed something weird, like people, if something's going on, you're going to like look to that person next to you. And if it's a Memphian, they're going to be like, now what's that about?
Right. That's interesting. Now, and so when you came down, where were you guys living?
We lived on McNeil Street up here.
Oh, yeah. So super close.
Very
okay,
close, before this building was open.
Yeah, because I mean, that can be such a huge way of framing a city, what part of town, especially in Memphis.
Yes.
And so I'm curious how do you feel like that informed your early experience in Memphis?
I really liked living in this neighborhood. I was like in the Evergreen Historic. We had an apartment that was also wildly affordable at the time, because like, as I said, this building was not open. So we were paying like $6.95 for like a 1,200 square foot apartment, on McNeil Street, which at the time was still great, but it was like a different vibe in the neighborhood. But our downstairs neighbor, Maria, I'm still friends with her right now. Every time I drive by her, not right now, always, I've always been friends with her. But our downstairs neighbor, she was a single mom, and she's Mexican. She had 2 kids, and I was like already like, you are so much better than my previous single mom downstairs neighbor, because KJ's sons were weird. But Maria was like very open and very excited to like get us, like she took me to join a kickball team, and like, yeah, she was just very excited to make sure that I felt at home in Memphis. And even though I absolutely sucked on the kickball team, I was the worst player. I made very few friends. Everybody was very nice and was making sure I was having a nice time. Yeah.
Now, when you got here, I mean, here you are, you come to Memphis, you have this photojournalism background, and you are coming in, obviously, hoping to do that. Mm-hmm. How did that look like, or what did that look like for you in terms of coming in to get your foot in the door, or to be able to do this thing in an endeavor that is really suffering? I mean, print media has been having trouble for a long time now. Mm-hmm. And so when you come in, what is that like?
I came in with like the privilege of connections via friendship, and also my time at the Times. I had started freelancing for the New York Times in grad school, because I had one editor, David Skull, R.I.P., very cool guy, very reliable person. He took a chance on me and hired me for a couple of jobs in Ohio. So that helped me, I think, in the internship process. And then the internship helped me maintain and connections at the Times. So I was doing a lot of work for the Times when I first got here. Yeah, I was. They have correspondents in. My tummy might start rumbling. They have correspondents in Atlanta that do like the southern region, and so there was like 1 or 2 guys that I would do work with pretty regularly those first years. And then, and then also like having friends who are in New York being like, oh, here's like this email, this editor just moved into this place. Like, here's an email if you want to reach out and let them know. Like, I had other friends who were freelancing in like not in markets that weren't like New York or DC. Like I have a friend in outside of Columbus, Ohio, who was working really hard with Bloomberg and like making a pretty reasonable living doing this like kind of freelance. Like he would tell me about like who he was talking to and the kinds of pitches he made in order to like maintain that. And so people like we were just like, because of that community I was able to build in grad school, I came with like a lot of kind of like industry like navigation help. And so that helped me start. And then I was also just doing, and at the time, my partner's job was a photojournalist at the Commercial Appeal. Mm-hmm. And so that was also a time, at that time, the newsroom had, I think it was 13 photographers and 2 editors, which is crazy. And so they were still hiring freelance pretty regularly. I think they're like less likely to do that now because all the things. But so I would do freelance assignments for them also, and that would put me in places in the community that would help me meet people. And like it still happens to me now. Like people will come up and be like, "Do you do wedding photos? Do you do?" And if someone asked me that, I'd be like, "Yeah, I do." Because I was like, I need to make money. I need to make my half of the rent. Which I honestly, another huge help I had was that Brad, because he was working a nice union job at a paper that was still doing well, he was like floating a lot of our extremely cheap rent at the time, and that helped me also not freak out about like not having an assignment every day of the week, because that is The day rates at the time were also garbage, you know.
Well, now, I mean, that thing about like I was a freelance photographer. We hear that expression all the time, and it has a place in my brain. But I don't. I think it would be hard pressed to tell you what that means. Like, do they call you and say, "Hey, the bridge is down. We need some pictures of the backed up traffic." How does that work? What
Yeah.
happens there?
Yeah, sometimes it's that. Sometimes like if you have like so in terms there's a lot of ways of being a photographer, right? Our friend Ziggy Mac, for example, has like I think his email signature is like photojournalist, art photographer. I don't like all of his because he does do so many things, right? And so you can be someone like that can within the field still have like several different concentrations that like so I generally have not been a wedding photographer because that's its own industry on its own. And you could be a freelance photographer as a wedding photographer, you know. You could also be a freelance photographer who does, I don't know, just like conceptual stuff. What I was doing was trying to maintain relationships with editors so that when news happened here, I would be one of the people that they would call.
Okay.
Yeah. And so that required not only like doing a lot of like email work, computer work to like communicate and like sometimes being like, oh, this news is happening. Is this something that like you all are interested in covering? I was less successful at that because I have rejection sensitivity stuff. And so I like actually hate pitching. But yeah, sometimes it's an assignment. I think that locally, yeah, I would like if something was breaking, sometimes I could be pulled into a situation. You're kind of like B team for any kind of local publication. But then additionally, what I was also doing in those first years was just like photographing like events for Catholic charities. You know what I mean? Like just doing stuff that wasn't necessary because you have to make money, you know? Yeah. I had to like photograph this one woman, this portrait for some trade magazine at some corporation. And she was someone who hated being photographed. It was like the most difficult portrait session I've ever had in my entire life. Not like a high-powered celebrity or a corporate person. It was like this very nice, like just woman who worked at this company who for some reason was being highlighted by her company. And she was just like clenched all the way from like the top of her head to her toes, just like it was hurting her. But I was doing stuff like that, you know, like I don't want to do that. I don't want to make her, she doesn't want her photo taken. But it was an assignment.
Now, as you're doing these things, I mean, I'm also curious because I don't really know that much about the world of photography. So I would imagine you have like a portfolio, and you were talking before that I love that thing about the formula for I mean, almost in the same way that my generation of artists had to have like 20 slides because that was what fit in the slidesheet, you know?
Right.
And so you've got this boom, boom, boom. You got to have the opening shot, then you have to have the detail shot, these things. I'm curious, like, in terms of thinking about your outward expression of yourself, like how you get gigs. Is that come in the form of like a website? And then in that website, there's sort of like a breakdown so that you can say, hi, my name is Andrea. This is my stuff.
Yeah. Definitely a portfolio is an important thing to have and have it representative of like your skills at any given moment. And that can be like a really daunting thing. So I feel like I've had just like a series of barely acceptable portfolios over time, but I definitely recognize the importance that they had. So I had like my thesis work from my MA on there. I had a lot of like a section that was basically like, these are like daily type assignments. Here are portraits and then stories. That's basically what my portfolio has been since grad school now. And so in that, like, you can send that stuff to Catholic charities when they're like, hey, do you do events? And I'm like, yes. I'm like, here's my website. That's not going to show them and I can do events, right? I mean, I would know that I could do events, but maybe they don't because it doesn't say event photographer. So then you have like a separate, I've been a Google Drive girl for too long. Like, these fools have my data, like, but yeah, so you'd have a Google Drive with like some wedding, some like wedding photos, like if somebody wanted to know like what it looked like when I photographed a wedding, and one for like just other stuff. I had another example in my head, but I can't remember now. Yeah. So there was like that, or event photos, like here's an event that I did and this is what it looks like. So that would be part of kind of like trying to exist to make money, you know, but also keeping my portfolio still closer to the kind of work that I'm interested in, you know, that I'm trying to put more energy into.
And so, talk to me a little bit more about being in Memphis. And so then you're here, you're taking these images. Were there any experiences that particularly stood out to you sort of early on in terms of your being here that made you say, oh, I could maybe stay here?
Wow, yeah. I really love thinking about like in the way that like those early days of falling in love with someone can be really sweet and nostalgic. I started falling very quickly in love with Memphis because, you know, random assignments, I'd come back and I'm like I felt like I made photos that for myself were better. Like I was happier with some of the stuff I was bringing back because I could feel myself just in a more easy way, like connecting with people, like being able to talk to them about what I was doing. And like I was starting to get a rhythm around how to introduce myself as someone who wasn't a part of an organization, someone who's just a person with a camera that's very interested in this kind of work. And finding more often than not that people would be like, word, you know, like, let's do it. And yeah, you can take my picture. Um, so it was really, and that was a bit distinct from, re- significantly distinct from what it had been like to try to do it, even with the support of an organization in New Hampshire. Um, so like culturally, I already was just feeling like a the warmth of acceptance. You know, I could tell that you know, growing up in Miami, you're so, or I grew up, I should say. I feel like a lot of us do, but speaking for me, uh, you grew up so self-aware of like what you look like, of your appearance, and like it's just very rare. It was like at the time, it was a very rare feeling to be like, it doesn't actually matter, you know, like as long as like my appearance is not the thing that matters the most here. I don't know like how to give Memphis credit for that necessarily, but it just feel like I've kind of described it as like a come as you are type of place. You know, there's not like a prototype that people expect you to roll up as. Like, yeah, I was at fucking Riverfest last night, and it was such a perfect mix of random Memphians. Like there was like high fashion cool youth, you know, like rave babies, and then like Sheila and Fred, you know, like some like older white folks, and then like the rap OGs had brought out this like really fun kind of like uh Gen X like older black folks crowd, you know, who were having a great time listening to the Memphis rap OGs. It was just it was really really fun, and like that is like the thing. I feel like Memphis sparkles with like a bunch of people just allowed to be themselves.
I like that. Now, what about? I would imagine that in that environment, being a part of like a news organization or being in that zone, I would imagine there was maybe like a distinction between art and photojournalism. Do you find or did you find a kind of connection in what we would think of as the art community, air quotes?
Oh yeah, definitely. That's because I lived on McNeil Street. Crosstown Arts, I think, had just started working out of those that shopping area right there on Cleveland before they had moved into the building, but they had opened already. So, and in the old and what's the Sanitas Health area now, health place, it was the old flea market, the Cleveland Street flea market, and so I could walk there, you know, and of course I was like, a flea market around the corner from me, I will be there. So I walked over to the flea market, and then I was just like looking around and saw that Story Booth had set up there with Nat Aiken. And so I saw that, and I was immediately like, listen, I'm a freelancer. I got a lot of spare time. This seems really cool. So Nat and Justin Thompson at the time were working together with kids to do both like writing stuff and filmmaking. And so I met Justin, who introduced me to like Crosstown Arts. And at the time, you know, that was like a very young version of an organization now that's been around for a minute. But That's how I met Mary Jo and Stacy back then, Brittany Boyd Bullock. And Ashley and I like ended up having like a really nice lunch together one time at, oh my gosh, I remember this so clearly, like at Evelyn and Olive's. And we were talking about, she ended up inviting me to co-curate this exhibition. It was like a 1-day pop-up in one of the galleries that they used to have there. But we ended up doing it about like, it was called Another Life. And it was some of my photographs. I had photographed B.B. King's procession down Beale Street as an assignment. And so I had all these photos that I didn't know what to do with, but I was like really excited about. So I exhibited those photos in kind of like this procession type layout. And we had other artists that were part of it. Yasmin Omari, who I love like so dearly. She's a Palestinian photographer, and she had photographs of like her grandmother's and her family home in Palestine. Like memory and loss were big themes. Stephanie, what is my homegirl's name? I can't think of her name right now. Stephanie Wexler. Stephanie Wexler also had some photographs that she had put in like this installation that you could like walk through. It was very cool. Ziggy had this really beautiful portrait that he like framed with like an LED light. It was great. Yeah. It was just like a one-night thing, but I'd never done anything quite like that. Like I'd done a little pop-up while I was in grad school with my classmates, but this was like in an actual like white wall. This is like the closest to a white wall gallery I had ever gotten, and mine were Costco prints that I just double stuck tape onto the walls. But I think maybe that was around the time you and I met. I feel like you were helping us maybe hang that show.
That sounds right.
Yeah. You taught me that 60 inches.
60 inches from center. It's a
That
very
is
key thing.
I
You
never
gotta
forget
know
that.
this. Yes.
And that always comes with the Hamlet Dobbins footnote.
I learned this.
Yeah.
Well, now thinking about that, I'm curious, what do you think it was about that early time at Crosstown that felt inviting, that made it a thing where you were like, oh, these are people that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, at the time I saw an organization of people, it was reasonably diverse, There was like, it was clear that everybody was like really invested in trying new things that would help them figure out what Crosstown Arts could be. And so there was like a lot of just possibility. I think a lot of brainstorming took root then, and that kind of permission in creativity is very rare, and so to see that permission exist in a way that wasn't really too gatekeepy. I'm sure there's always some like level of gatekeeping that happens incidentally, intentionally or not, but that felt less gatekeepy than what I thought it would be. Like suddenly I'm co-curating a show, and like meeting new photographers and like we're making work together.
Now I'm wondering too. I mean, was that my mental timeline is a little blurry, but I seem to remember you were one of the really early residents at Crosstown. Was that kind of around that time or slightly after that time?
It was a little bit after.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then were you still working freelance at that time? Okay.
And I was working freelance when I was a resident. You were asking? Yeah. When I was a resident, I was doing freelance, and I was also working in the accounting department of $1 Million Quartet / Sun Studios, that country music production, country music television production that filmed here in Memphis in 2016. I had been, so my first year freelancing, I did my taxes and was like, what the fuck? I'm extremely broke all of a sudden. Like, the very little money I had suddenly is claimed by one Uncle Sam. Yeah, so I, as many a distressed artist, turned to the service industry and worked at Fox and Hound on Sanderlin Road for a number of years. Oh, not a number of years, for like a year. But basically only got that job because I needed to pay off that tax bill. But then, after working for a year, I was like, this is crazy. This place is crazy. And I had also met Eileen Townsend, back then, and her and I had planned this like trip to go to South Korea with Bird Cap to like try to work on a project that she was going to try and pitch somewhere. It didn't materialize, but we ended up going to South Korea. And so I was like, okay, I'm gonna I was gonna say break up with my job. I'm gonna quit my job to just be able to take this time to go to South Korea for, I think we went for like 14 days. And as I was like fixing to do that and like kind of nervous too, because I was like, I need money. This opportunity, because of like meeting people through Crosstown, came my way. They're like, can you work in the accounting department? This is not my ministry. This is not my strong suit. But I was like, I can do it. Yeah, I can be a cleric. It was just clerical work really, but it was like $12 an hour, which at the time was better than my server wage, unfortunately, and also consistent. And I also wouldn't have to clean out ranch ramekins all day, which, yeah. Oh my gosh! In my shirt, my Fox and Hound uniform, on the front, it had like a fox kind of on my tummy, but it was like a low V-neck, so that like encouraging us to push our boobs together to, low V-neck, and on the back it said, "I get paid to party."
Oh my goodness.
That was hard. I'm not gonna lie. Every day I had to give myself a little pep talk to like slide into that shirt, because I was like, but it was fine. I actually ran into someone on assignment last month who was on my kickball team and was a regular at Fox and Hound, and he recognized me from both, and I was like, whoa, like that was such a long time ago, like legit like 10 years ago now. So obviously I've been haunting his dreams since then. But yeah, those are not too, like, I would say those are not full low lights, but not Andrea at her finest in Memphis. So to be remembered for those things, well, I was on assignment for ProPublica, so I'm feeling like correct.
Right.
ProPublica is like a good, or yeah. And he's like, hey, we were on that kickball team together. I was like, fuck, damn. I have not thought about that in a long time, which is why I was able to bring it up today, because this man reminded me that I was on that thing. Yeah. But sorry, that was a.
That's okay. I'm totally happy about it. Okay, so you were doing the work for the accounting firm.
Yes, and had like been trying to freelance in between. My job was to sit 12 hours a day at this like cold office downtown and basically like handle paperwork for these 3 accountants that were brought in from elsewhere. Or 4. All 4 of them were wildly sexist. One of them was full on antisocial. Like, it was it ended up being a lot harder than it, but stuff would come up. Like, this was, okay, so 2016, we're a year out from the 2016 was a really big year in terms of police killings of Black people. Like, Sandra Bland, I think, happened 2015. Mike Brown had moved in 2014, the same year that I moved here. Actually, Mike Brown happened on my 30th birthday. So, which was like I moved here late July and then found out what happened in Ferguson. And so there was some Black Lives Matter starting to come up, Black Lives Matter protests and more movement stuff starting to come up then. 2015, it was also like, we had Darius Stewart get killed here in Memphis, Sandra Bland. And then 2016, that summer, and I was in the accounting seat in the summer. That was the summer that Philando Castile and Alton Brown got killed in the same week in July. And so there was just a lot of stuff happening. And so sometimes I'd have to be like, I'm just going to go to lunch and then just like pray that they don't notice that I haven't been back for 2 hours, because I'd be photographing. There was like a protest outside of Graceland, I remember, that I like, the Times called me and was like, there's this protest going on, can you go? And I kind of like looked around and like, these fools are just being desk guys. And so I was just like, I'm just going to go. I just left without saying anything. It's not, I don't suggest doing that, legally, of course, but I don't regret it. I was just kind of like, I was just there basically to like move their papers around. So I didn't feel like I was like, I don't know. But it was that kind of thing. And same thing even when I was at the restaurant. I would still get freelance assignments, and there'd be times where I'd have to just like put a sweater on or another shirt on over my I get paid to party shirt.
Right.
Like I covered some tornado damage in December, I think it was 2015. Yeah, 2015, in Mississippi. I think I feel like a tornado hit Holly Springs. Yeah, yeah, I'm almost positive. So I went down and like switched a shift with someone and then went back and served. Uh,
I mean, it
in
really
the, in
is.
the
I mean, it
evening.
sounds like almost like a Spider-Man kind of thing. It's like you were doing this thing, you were serving and cleaning these ranch ramekins, and then you get a text, and then you're like, I gotta go cover this, and then you bail out, and then you go and you cover this thing. To me, it sounds really exciting, but also totally unpredictable. And then
Yeah.
also, I mean, there's almost like a part of it, I think, that it's not necessarily always around tragedy, but it definitely is a thing where like, oh my God, this horrible thing has happened, and so now I need to swing into action. I can imagine that would be really emotionally difficult.
Yeah, yeah. Unfortunately, I grew up with like a lot of practice with disassociation. And so like the deep part about all this is like I'm learning now at 40 that like I use my care like part of my connection to photography has been like a tool to disassociate through hard times, but still participate in something that I think is important. Like there's like a million things said and written about this, but there's like a definitely like a protective barrier that happens when you put a viewfinder to your face. I think I mean, definitely for me psychologically, like I'm working, so moving from one work job to the next work job doesn't have kind of that like cool Spider-Man, Clark Kent vibe as much as it does. It's like my trauma responses built me for this, honestly. So it's just kind of yeah, it is emotional for sure. I'm not sure my body's gotten good at storing emotions and places where I don't need to tend to them all the time, but they do come up. So there's like long-term things to that. I also was my partner was also a photojournalist, so we had that, like that connection back at home of like being able to like talk about what happened, and the other person understands, pretty unequivocally like like where the other's coming from. So that communication was deeply helpful, and having him to help me edit, and all the things like that. He floated me, as I mentioned previously, financially, thankfully, and also like really creatively and emotionally through this. I mean, yeah, stuff got very real for me after the election in 2016. Like witnessing all that stuff, that falls on me much harder. Witnessing all the things you've seen, all the people here in Memphis do very like personally risky things to stand in solidarity with one another against something that affects all of us, but it affects them in a racist, horrible way. And then we elect Donald Trump. I got very drunk at the High Tone that night, and I just spent like all morning crying on our sun porch at McNeil. I was just like crying, 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 crying. I barely went to sleep. It was bad. Yeah, especially from sitting here in Memphis. I'm like, how like it just feels like we're in a different country. Like, or the sort of democratic response to the moment for the whole country makes you feel like you're not a part of the country that is like making that decision.
Now, at that time in 2016, was that before or after you had that residency at Crosstown?
Same time.
Same time. Talk to me a little bit, because if I remember right, I have a memory of it, but it's very hazy. And so will you talk a little bit about your residency at Crosstown? Because that was, again, before they have this building. That was when there was sort of like this backspace there behind the office of one of the buildings over there, and that sort of long strip mall that they had, and they were sort of trying to envision what it might be like, over here in this building on sort of a small scale. Will you talk a little bit about that process?
Yeah, it was very exciting to be able to be a part of that first class of residents at the time. They gave people that huge back studio that backed up against Yvonne Bobo's old spot. And we had it was 3 residents that first year, and I think we each had it for like 3.5 months. So I got that middle chunk during the summer, and that was the summer also of the bridge takeover. So my head was very much in that space, like a collectivist space around like where the work should be focusing. And so I was also, I'm from Miami, so I understand gentrification like very intimately. And I did have a lot of questions as someone who had been living in this neighborhood already, about what it was going to be like when this building opened. And so my sort of time in that project was just spent trying to. I made it an open studio basically. Anybody who wanted like a nice portrait made could come and sit for a portrait. I had like open studio times. Me and the balloon lady at the Cleveland Kroger were tight because I was coming like every weekend to get some balloons so that people would see it because it was kind of tucked away. And I also just like started making like ton of 4x6 prints from like everything I'd photographed so far in Memphis, and then stuff I was photographing in that moment, including the bridge, which had happened. And so that stuff was also just being kind of sorted out. It would be out in the studio so people could experience, like go through the work prints and stuff. They could see like entire takes. But yeah, so like that's mainly how I used it for like a big editing and like ideating space. And then also as like a community space to help people understand like what it's like to be photographed and what photography I do. And the photography, additionally on top of that, I also sort of like tried to set out on this project with the help of Sparks and Portia Stevens, who were helping me in the residency at that time, because I just was working the 12 hours at the accounting thing. I was still doing freelancing, and I was trying to spend like at least like, 20 hours in the studio. I don't know if that maths necessarily, but yeah. So I was struggling to like do the project I wanted to do was to document this neighborhood, like what I know to be this neighborhood, like some of like Evergreen, but mostly the stuff like here north of, like along Jackson, north of the building, east of the building. And so I really wanted to document it in that moment to see how it would change in the next, at the building opened in 2017, I think.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, when you say you were trying to document the neighborhood, I mean, I totally, and then also thinking about your connection or your history of witnessing gentrification. I'm curious, like when you started out on that project, how it began, and then like all good projects, I'm sure it morphed and changed a little bit. I'm curious about that too. Talk a little bit about that project, and then how logistically you did it, and visually those pieces worked.
Yeah. So I treated it as like I was a daily newspaper staffer again, and I would go out and find places where people are hanging out and basically photograph them like assignments. So Portia was really helpful in going around to some, like a lot of the local business owners to be like, Andrea's working on this project. She's got these open studio hours, and like she would love to photograph here. And so my idea was to photograph things exactly as they are, just to be like, and photograph that like it's my job as a daily newspaper photographer. Like, how do I photograph the everyday here? Like at this point, yeah, I'm committed to like the everyday being kind of like the main source of visual language that I use in trying to tell stories. And so, which is exactly, sorry, I just made a connection because that is exactly, I'm such a child of Preston Ganaway, also the Pulitzer Prize winner from the Concord Monitor. And yeah, that piece was just like how the everyday of like grief informs us really about the depths of it. And so I feel like the everyday is like a beautiful instrument that allows us to appreciate, who we are, what we want, what we've tried. It can be so dimensional when you really start to study it. And so I just wanted to photograph the everyday around here. I photographed one of my neighbors who passed away like the year after. I photographed at that barber school that used to be on Jackson that is closed now. I photographed a lot of Pee Wee football. A lot. I actually, the Pee Wee football team, they showed up to the opening of my residency show, and it was honestly like one of like the cutest nights of my life. It was amazing. And I had only been in the city barely 2 years at that point. And when like the residency show opened, it had a bunch of prints from the neighborhood. It had a bunch of prints of the portraits that I had made in the studio. And it had a bunch of those work prints. I had like basically like put them all together on these like big rings. Put all the 4x6s together, punched a hole, and like tied them all the ones that were about the same things together. And so those were part of the exhibit also. And there was so many people who were like so supportive about like this feeling like a part of this feeling like the city that we live in, which is very like that's very affirming for me. People were like going through the work prints of like the protests and feeling things, and yeah, it was, I don't know, how do you not fall in love with a place like when they do that? I don't know.
Okay, now thinking about time, we got about 18 minutes. How you doing?
Good.
Okay, great. You mentioned the bridge takeover a couple of times.
Yeah.
I mean, that to me, I feel like that's where I started to see your photojournalism photos. I mean, I had seen some of them a little bit before, but I remember those pictures in particular. Will you sort of walk us through that particular time? And then also, just because like history is such a monster and we're sort of like constantly inundated by these deaths, will you walk us back through the things that sort of led up to that bridge takeover?
Yeah. As I mentioned before, like Michael Brown's killing was in 2014. So it really aligned with when I had first started getting here. So it's always been top of mind in terms of being in a city like Memphis with such a long tradition of resistance being a part of their identity. I was expecting a response like I had seen on the news in other cities, but that wasn't necessarily what we got back in 2014. There was definitely responses, but I think that people mobilizing was clearly something that people were struggling with for a lot of valid personal reasons. Like at that time there was a police ordinance that made it illegal for groups of people more than 24, I think it was, to gather. So if like you were if it was just like 26 of y'all on a corner or on a couple corners at a protest, or no, on one corner, that was an illegal gathering, which is an insanely racist rule. Like they've let that go seemingly since then, but at the time they were very stringent. Like it'd be like protests of like 5 people and all 5 would get arrested. There was just like it was clear that there was a tension between people in the city who wanted to do something, wanted to say things that the killing of the extrajudicial, outright brutal killings of Black people are unacceptable, but they were scared to because there was so much punishment involved. Like I feel like the MPD at the time was really just aggressive at not allowing people to mobilize. During the Darius Stewart stuff, I think a young man named Darius Stewart was killed by a police officer here in Memphis. And that happened in July 2015. He was, of course, like 18 years old and unarmed and shot in front of a church on his knees. Like, it's brutal stuff. But that happening, that kind of, I think, woke up just a lot of people. I mean, understandably, like, this is just, it's too much. It's too much. Kids can't just be dying for being passengers in a car. He wasn't even driving. He got pulled over in a traffic stop. So I think that helped people find some more courage to get back together and start. And so I met a lot of people in that first year of protest, not first year, but in 2015. And that year I met a lot of people, and I saw that folks were trying to make this like there was community that was building in that space. Some of the people I still love the most dearly in the city are people I met in that time. And then 2016 came, the flow of body cam video, surveillance video showing us these horrific scenes of injustice had not ceased. And we had a year after Darius Stewart, this like around the same month, definitely in the same month, but the same week, both Philando Castile and Alton Brown were killed by police officers in separate cities, Minneapolis and Baton Rouge. And people were just upset. Like upset. I mean, I remember I went to like 3 protests that week before the bridge protest. Like people were kind of trying to make things happen all over the city, and it didn't seem like there was going to be anything big because, like as I said, like I'd been covering protests with very like handfuls of people that would get squashed so quickly. So I wasn't expecting anything like what happened. But I think that like because of like it was like Philando Castile was Wednesday. I think Alton Brown was Alton Brown. I'm so sorry. Alton Brown is a Food Network guy. Alton Sterling was on Friday, and then Saturday everybody was like outraged. By Sunday, there was just like a flyer going around that people were going to meet downtown for a thing, and I almost was like, we've already had a number of protests this week. Like I had a work party at the time. Actually, it was like our closing party for that TV show I was working on. So I was like, I'm gonna go to the closing party for a little bit and maybe swing by the protest afterward, because the work party was one of those apartment complexes right on Mud Island that like faces the pyramid kind of, and the bridge. And so I went to my work thing, and I thought it was gonna be weird, so I brought my camera, but I only brought like my little like fuck around setup. So it was like my older camera and the plastic lens that's pretty small. Like, so nothing, I'm gonna be having a beer in my hand. I'm not trying to like hurt anything. So I went to we're at this like place, and it's a pool party, but like no one's in the pool because no one wants to get in their bathing suit in front of all these Hollywood people. So we're just sitting there all hot. And then I start hearing stuff from downtown, and I could hear it start happening. And I end up running down. I start hearing, Brad was working also that night. My partner, he was working for the paper. So he was just like, this protest is getting a little huge and a little intense. And so the people in front of the FedEx Forum had started gathering. It was just like a mass that I hadn't seen before. And so I bailed on the party. I was like in like a tank top and jean shorts and just had my little camera with me. But I went down there and joined Brad, and like the next thing we know, we're moving, and then we're on the fucking bridge. It was crazy. Like, I mean, traffic was still moving. Like we walked into traffic. Yeah, it was wild. And there was like, it felt like there was like 1,000 people that marched onto the bridge. I mean, that's the only way we could do it. Because like I said, there was no plan to stop traffic. It was just something that as far as I know, was almost spontaneous. I think maybe some people within the crowd had thought, okay, like maybe this is where we could take it, because we had seen that happen. People shutting down highways and bridges across the city during these years. And we hadn't been able to, like every time in a protest previous, every time the protest would move toward the bridge, the cops would cut us off, right? So I had no idea that this was, I was like, oh, of course I could go to the bridge. And then we're like on the bridge, and there's like children around, and I'm like, oh my God, this is like really happening. But there's so many of us, so many of us. I've been on bridge protests since, but not one as big as this one.
I love how, in part, we need to kind of slow it down a little bit. But again, I love how like your spidey sense went off, and then you got the call, and then you like ran into action with your tank top and your jean shorts and your cruddy little camera, and suddenly you were there with Brad. Now, so there's a bunch of stuff I want to kind of break down, and not to like totally ruin the magic of it.
No,
but
okay.
I'm curious, like. That must be really particularly interesting to be experiencing an event. Was this the first time you and Brad had been at an event where you were both sort of in action?
No, we had, so while I was in New Hampshire, I was there during the 2011 presidential primary.
Okay.
New Hampshire is very big on their primary stuff, like in the same way that that town hall stuff is like honoring this democratic core that they love to maintain. They're also technically the first primary in the nation, and so there's a lot of retail politics for months from just these like dopey candidates, like anyway. There's an abundance of political events, and so Brad was with me for part of that time. So we and he had actually one of the internships went to him, I think, at some point. So we worked at the same paper for like a couple months, but it was always still very exciting. Like we went and photographed the eclipse together, the 2017 eclipse, and I remember it was just like we were taking pictures, and then we like gave each other a smooch, and then keep taking pictures because it's like we're also experiencing it together.
Yeah.
And he was watching out for me. We had Yoshi was there too, Yoshi Smith, and Brandon Dill was also there. So all of us, I think that was also a time for like, I think that was the first time Brandon and I really were like, oh, we're like in this together. You know what I mean? Like it was a real acknowledgement for us as like both Brad and myself as a pair that like really loved this work. That like this is crazy that we're here, and I'm so glad we have each other for this, because doing the work alone is not actually very fun.
In my mind, I mean, of course, I'm envisioning you guys as like the Avengers, and like you guys are like all in a huddle, and you're moving through this crowd together, and there's this sort of danger all around. But I mean, in reality, I know that when you're in a place and you are together, there's a kind of safety in that, in terms of like looking out
Definitely.
for one another, and then. So talk a little bit more about, like you were saying that when Brad messaged you, he was saying it was getting kind of big, and
Yeah.
there was something that was a little bit different about this one. When you got there, what were some things that you noticed that felt different to you?
Definitely the fact that like I didn't recognize the majority of the people there. The protests previously had been not that they were like scantily attended, but they were just nowhere near the numbers that were even in front of the FedEx Forum. So in that big crowd, I only recognized like a handful of people. Like I had to search for the people I usually clock quickly at a protest, right? Like the regulars. So that already I was like, oh, and there's like mad kids also, like people. There was all kinds of people that you just don't regularly see at like community events. People had definitely just come with their kids because like they heard that this was happening and they felt compelled to. You know what I mean? I don't think, and the old police chief, what's his name? Not Mike Williams, whatever. The guy who was interim police chief at the time. I remember made a big. Michaela Watts and I interviewed him like a year later about that day, and he described it like all the danger that the protesters were bringing, and that like he used this phrase I will never forget. He said there were so many hand babies out there. I guess like small children. I've never heard that before, but he kept talking about the hand babies. And there were a lot of children out there, but there was so many people making sure that everyone was safe, which I had never seen happen spontaneously that way. Like I've been able to cover, like I said, other bridge protests since then, other like attempt to shut down, areas. And a lot of planning has to go into those things because there's a lot of risk involved. And we don't want to create, we don't want to cause bad harm. You don't want to harm anything. So, yeah.
That's a good place to pause.
Yeah.
Man, to me, that thing about how those events happen are particularly interesting. I mean, especially in terms of thinking about like what is it in the world that makes this thing happen? And and sometimes it can be about, this is happening, this event happened, and so like of course there's this kind of response. But I'm always really curious too about thinking about what it is that will create a thing like this where something happens when it has never happened before.
Yeah.
And how it really was sort of I think for a lot of people, a turning point in terms of thinking about the city and things about the city's activism. I really appreciate you talking to me about that. Great.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe we'll take up there the next time.
Oh my goodness.
Thank you, Andrea. And that was the second of two interviews that we did with Andrea Morales. The interview that you just listened to was recorded on May 3rd, 2025. Please join us next week when we will have another interview. Until then, thank you for listening.